Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Simple Watch Reviews, where I review simple watches in a straightforward way. Today I'm going to answer a question I see asked online a lot. How do you tell if a watch is too big for you? Now this is a question I've had to ask myself a lot in the 15 or so years that I've been collecting watches, because I've got pretty small wrists. My wrist is about 6¼ inches around, so definitely smaller than average. And back when I started collecting watches, the craze was for really big watches, and most of those just didn't work for me at all. So over the years it's something I've thought about a lot, and what I've realised is there is one rule and one rule only about whether a watch is too big for you. I'll get to what that is a little later in the video, but everything else is just taste. It's just down to your personal preferences in terms of look and comfort. And I think the really important message here is don't let other people tell you what you should wear. Wear what you want to wear on your wrist. Wear the watches that make you happy, and don't let people tell you that you're wrong. When you're out and about in real life, rather than hanging about in kind of watch forums online, 99% of the people you meet will not care at all what watch you're wearing or how big it is. So wear what pleases you. Right, before I get to that one rule, I'm just going to go through some terminology. So if you think you know all this stuff, skip forward in the video. I'll leave timestamps so that you can do that. So the first piece of terminology is diameter. So that basically is the width of the watch. And that is normally what we use to measure the size of watches. But actually, in terms of fit, it's not that important, and I'll show you in this video how I'm quite happy wearing watches of massively different diameters. So diameter, the width of the watch. The next thing is the lug to lug distance, and this is actually more important in terms of getting a good fit of watch. So this is the length of the watch, effectively the length from top to bottom. Next up we have thickness, which doesn't necessarily make a huge difference in terms of wearability, but clearly a thicker watch is going to be a bit heavier. And finally we have dial size. So there's a ratio that's really important in terms of what watches look like on your wrist, and that's the ratio between the width of the dial, so the part of the watch you actually look at to tell the time, and the width of the watch overall. To put it simply, the smaller the dial is, the smaller the watch will appear, because that is the part of the watch that your eye is drawn to. What that means in practice is that dive watches, which tend to have a large rotating bezel around the dial, will tend to wear a bit smaller than watches that don't have a rotating bezel. Okay, so what is the golden rule? It's really, really simple. The length of the watch, so the lug to lug distance, shouldn't exceed the width of your wrist. By the width of your wrist, I mean the distance across the top of your wrist, not the circumference of your wrist. If the length of the watch is bigger than the width of your wrist, the ends of the watch are going to overhang your wrist and it's going to look weird. So the width of my wrist is about 50mm, maybe a shade under, and the length of this watch is over 50mm. And as you can see, it just looks too big. Aside from that though, as I said, everything is down to taste. My personal taste is for watches between about 36 and 39mm in diameter. They tend to work well on my wrist, but the way a dive watch of that diameter looks on my wrist versus a non-dive watch is very different, and that's because of that ratio between the dial and the size of the watch. So here you can see my Rolex Explorer, which is a 36mm non-dive style watch, next to my Doxa Sub 300, which is a 42mm dive style watch. The difference in size doesn't look nearly as much as that, because the dial on the Doxa is actually smaller than the dial on the Rolex. And because the lug to lug is the really important distance, I'm actually quite happy wearing dive watches with a huge diameter as long as the lug to lug is short. So this Seiko Tuner, for example, is 46mm in diameter, so a whole centimetre bigger in diameter than that Rolex. But the lug to lug is about 45mm, so it actually wears really well. There are two other important things to consider in terms of that lug to lug length though, and both of those relate to the type of bracelet that's on the watch, if it's a bracelet watch. So the first of those is what's called the end links of the bracelet, so the parts where the bracelet meets the case of the watch. There's a type of end link called a male end link, which actually extends the length of the watch. So you can see here on the Rolex, the lug to lug is actually shorter than the effective lug to lug when you're wearing the watch, because it's got those longer end links. The other type of bracelet that's important to think about is integrated bracelets. So this Tissot PRX has an integrated bracelet, which again means that the effective length of the watch is much larger than it might look like on paper. So to summarise, wear what makes you happy, but make sure you pay attention to the width of your wrist as well as the circumference of your wrist, and to the length of the watch as well as the diameter of the watch. I've got one more tip for you before I close, and that is to remember that wrist shots, the kind of shots that people put on Instagram and Reddit and watch forums, tend to be really deceptive. And that's because when you hold your phone or camera close to your wrist to take a picture, your watch will look much bigger than it actually looks in real life. There's a scientific term for this, but I can never remember what it is. But what you can see here is me wearing a variety of watches where I've both taken a normal style wrist shot with my phone and also taken some footage with the camera placed a little bit further away from me. And the watches look way smaller when the camera's further away. That's what watches will look like in real life. So if you're taking wrist shots and putting them on Instagram and the watches look huge to you, go and stand in front of a mirror and look at your watch on your wrist in the mirror, and you'll get a much better idea of what it really looks like. Anyway, hope you found that useful today. Do let me know in the comments if you've got any tips you'd like to share with other viewers, and please do consider subscribing for more simple watch reviews.